Hello, students! Today we're going to talk about something that affects almost every part of our lives, globalization, and how it has changed the Indian economy. You know, from the phones we use to the cars we see on the road, globalization is everywhere. So let's try and understand what it really means for us. Just think about it for a moment. When you go to a market today, look at the sheer variety of things you can buy. So many different brands, so many choices. But you know, it wasn't always like this. Just a few years ago, the options were much more limited. This big change, this explosion of choice, is a direct result of globalization. So, with all these goods and services moving from one country to another, it makes you wonder, right? Who is actually in charge of all this? Who sets the rules for this giant global marketplace to make sure things are fair? Well, to answer that, we have to understand that when countries trade with each other, it can get complicated. There can be unfair taxes, or one country might try to block goods from another. So it became very clear that the world needed a common set of rules and somebody to enforce them. This need led to the creation of organizations like the World Trade Organization, or as we call it, the WTO. So what exactly is the WTO? Well, its main purpose is to liberalize international trade. Now that's a big word, but it simply means making trade freer, breaking down the barriers between countries so that buying and selling becomes easier. With about 160 countries as its members, the WTO acts like a referee for global trade, making sure everyone is playing by the same rules. Now, that sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But in reality, it's very complex. The rules set by the WTO are often a source of huge debate, and there is no area where this argument is more heated than in agriculture. Let's try and understand why farming is such a big point of conflict. Look at this picture. This is what a typical large farm in a developed country like the USA looks like. It's massive, right? You see huge machines, giant fields. Farming there is often a big business run by huge corporations using the latest technology. Now let's look at the huge difference. In the US, agriculture is a very small part of their economy, and very few people work as farmers. But, and this is the important part, their farmers get huge amounts of money from their government. This is called a subsidy. A subsidy is basically financial help from the government. This extra money allows them to sell their crops at very low prices in the world market. Now look at India. Here, agriculture is a huge part of our economy, and it employs a very large number of people. But our farmers get very little government support in comparison. So you see, it's not really a level playing field. And this is the main point of the argument. Developing countries like India have been saying to the developed countries, look, we followed the WTO rules, we removed our trade barriers, but you are still giving massive subsidies to your farmers, which isn't right. Is this really free and fair trade? It's a very important question. So this big global debate has had a very real impact, right here in India. As our country opened up its markets, we've seen both the good and the bad sides of globalization. It's a story that has had winners, and it has had losers. This is the most important idea I want you to remember from our discussion today. The impact of globalization has not been the same for everyone in India. For some people, it has brought amazing new opportunities, but for others, it has created a lot of problems and hardship. The experience has been very different for different people. Okay, so let's start by looking at the positive side. What have been some of the major gains for India from globalization? Well, for consumers, especially those of us living in cities, the benefits are quite clear. We have so much more choice now. Because of all the competition, the quality of products has generally gotten better, and in many cases, prices have come down. All this has helped improve the standard of living for many people. And it wasn't just good for consumers. The competition from foreign companies actually pushed our own top Indian companies to improve. They had to invest in new technology and raise their quality standards to compete. And some of them, like Tata Motors or Infosys, have become so successful that they are now multinational companies themselves. And of course, one of the biggest success stories has been the boom in our service sector, especially IT. Foreign companies realized they could get services like customer support done in India at a lower cost. This created millions and millions of new jobs, particularly for the young and educated people in our country. But, as we've been saying, that is not the whole picture. For every success story, there are many others who have found it very difficult to cope. So now, let's look at the other side of the story, the challenges that globalization has brought. For small producers in India, people with small factories or workshops, the sudden increase in competition was a huge problem. They were now competing with cheap imported goods. For them, the situation was very simple and very harsh. Either find a way to compete, or your business will be forced to shut down. Let's take a real example to understand this. Think about Ravi, who had a small business making capacitors, a part used in TVs. His business was doing okay. But then, as per WTO rules, the government removed restrictions on imports. Suddenly, cheap imported capacitors flooded the market. The big TV companies started using those instead, and Ravi's business just couldn't survive. He had to let go of most of his workers. Ravi's story shows us a bigger problem. It's not just about businesses shutting down. It's about what happens to the workers. Because of this intense pressure to compete, many companies started looking for ways to cut their costs. And very often, this pressure fell directly on the workers, leading to much less job security. And this brings us to another important term: labor flexibility. What does this mean? Well, simply put, instead of hiring workers on a permanent basis with benefits like Provident Fund and so on, companies started hiring them on a temporary basis. This helps the company save money, but for the worker, it means their job is no longer secure. And this has had a very real human cost. Consider the story of Sushila, a garment factory worker. She used to have a permanent job with benefits. But to cut costs, her company let go of permanent workers and started hiring temporary ones. So Sushila lost her secure job. Today, she works as a temporary worker for longer hours and much less pay with no job security at all. So we have seen both sides now, the gains and the challenges, the opportunities and the hardships. This leads us to the most important question. What is the way forward? How can we make globalization fair so that it benefits everybody? The government has a very critical role to play here. It needs to make sure that our labor laws are followed properly to protect the rights of workers like Sushila. It can also help small producers like Ravi to make them stronger so they can compete. If needed, it can also use some trade barriers to protect certain industries. And, very importantly, it has to negotiate hard at the WTO for fairer rules for all developing countries. And so we end with this question for you to think about. Globalization is a reality of our world today. We can't go back. The real question is, how do we make it fair? What do you think is the single most important step that can be taken to make sure that the benefits of globalization are shared by everyone, not just a lucky few?